Awesome. So hello everyone and welcome to the Student Art Podcast. I'm your host Ross Baxter and today's episode is number 14 of the series, and today's guest is an amazing lecturer and artist, Iain Macarthur. How's it going, Iain?
Oh, very well, thanks Ross. Thanks for that intro. I'm sure I don't deserve that.
Trust me, you do. You're really good at what you do. Thanks so much for coming on. It really means a lot. I'm really looking forward to today's podcast. So if you're new to the podcast, as usual, we always talk about the main topic of student education. And if you're new, we are live on 9 different platforms. So obviously alongside YouTube, we are on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and finally Stitcher. And as always on the podcast, one of the new things I've been introducing is making sure artists start sharing their work. So basically, it'd be great for basically all of you to start sharing your links in the description below. Doesn't matter what level, just make sure to include them in the comments, and I'll start including that in the next podcast. So let's just get straight into the podcast. So as usual, Iain, I always start off with basically the guests just giving us a wee introduction about themselves. So what is it that you do, and what got you into, for example, teaching and so forth?
Okay. Thanks for that. Well, for the last sort of 22, I think it's as much as 22 years now, I've been teaching in one way, shape, or form. And so basically, at the moment, for the last 7 years now, 8 years. My God, time flies, Ross.
Certainly does.
It's probably maybe closer to 8 or 9 years I've been sort of teaching the 3D animation HND course at Edinburgh College. Mm-hmm. Or previous name to that before we merged was Julianesque College. Yeah.
Yep.
And again, before I was doing that particular course, I was delivering a multimedia course before that. And before that, my skills in terms of expertise were in sort of graphic design, illustration, video, Photoshop, all associated skills you'd expect to have in sort of like design, as well as 3D. I came into sort of 3D from a peculiar angle, doing the multimedia aspect of things, and we started off way back with a piece of software back then, which was called Infinity, right?
All right, okay.
Yeah, and it just sort of grew and grew out of that. Then myself, along with others, we started to write the 3D animation course about eight years ago.
8 years, jeez.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just like thinking about it in terms of like when I was there, when I was in Edinburgh. Gee whiz, I was actually talking to Fran the other day. And I realised it's actually I think it's 6 years since I've been in Edinburgh. I think 6 years. Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so scary to think about it. But
I know the time is absolutely accelerating at a rate of knots, and we all have difficulty trying to figure out was it a year, was it 2 years, was it 4 years? You know, it's just like crazy.
It's mental. Awesome. So obviously you're a teacher and so forth, and obviously you've got a great passion for art. I take it art was like the main thing you wanted to get into, or was it teaching that was always your goal, or like where did it start?
Well, I was never teaching, put it that way. And it really wasn't a bad thing, because my father was a teacher, my sister was a teacher, my uncle was a teacher. I had lots of teachers in the family. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that it's just that to a certain degree I saw some of this sort of damage that it did to them, so I thought, no way I'm going to go there.
Right, okay.
Because teachers do work hard, so they take a lot of homework home with them. It's it's almost like a 24/7 job, and these days due to the internet, I think it's even more so now, because I like to try and leave myself open for students to contact me any time in the day or week where possible. Although I do take sort of holidays as being fairly sacrosanct, and switch off at those points. But during the working week, if they've got a problem, then you can usually message me.
Brilliant. I think like one of the main things that I wish teachers got a lot more of, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this yourself. Like I think teachers deserve way more credit in terms of, like, for example, one of the main things I've always talked about in the podcast is understanding balance between the course and like the modules people are doing. For example, when you were teaching us in Edinburgh, everyone obviously, we have our different interests and so forth, and like it was the same thing as Abertay for Abertay and Abertay lectures when I went there. Like there's only so much you guys can know and like teach us, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get that balance. And I guess obviously maybe it's because maybe there's a short supply in teachers in the creative fields. I'm not quite sure because I'm not an expert on it yet, and that's why it's great to have you on as well. But it's like making sure that students get a better know what the limits are overall, and know how much they need to do like teaching for themselves, like self-learning. So it's like, for example, all the questions I'm going to bring up today on the podcast, they're all about the teacher's perspective. So far, all the guests we've had on, we've had a variety of different artists, a lot of different backgrounds, and a lot more from the student side. However, having Iain on is now going to be able to really round things off and really hear about like the do's and don'ts and the limitations teachers have. So it'd be great if you want to start off with just the first question, which was what do you wish you could teach students but you don't have access to? It's quite a big question, but maybe if there's something you can answer that.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say I've always had a strong feeling that things like motion capture and acting performance are things which I would really like to teach, because the motion capture, as you well know, it's a tool which, in terms of animation, it's not the simplest in the world, but it's getting a lot more simple in terms of being able to sort of quickly grab some motion and then be able to sort of clean it up and finesse it. That's fairly easy thing to do. However, acting performance is a very different type of thing. I mean, they do go hand in hand with animation, but most students don't know how to act, right? So therefore, standing, in front of a motion capture setup isn't actually going to do them too many favors. So it'd be good if it could be aligned more with, say, drama students, people who do know how to act. So if you want to get a feeling or emotion or a performance out, then something they really need to sit down and work it in terms of performance. It's not the easiest thing to do in the world for students to embrace. I get that, but then neither is animation. So
it's like, for example, like that's one of the main things that when I was in your module, that was great in terms of you're always talking about like becoming the character. Like for example, when I was in Edinburgh, I was still kind of finding my steps in terms of what I wanted to do. So I enjoyed animation, I enjoyed 3D environment art. So when I was doing Animation Mentor at the time, which is an online Disney course, one of the main things was literally acting out your poses. And for example, having like the motion capture, having the VR, all these different tools. I know, I think some universities have it. For example, like the bigger ones in that, in terms of like, for example, I know Nomen, like the massive school, would have these pleasures and stuff. But it'd be great if universities were able to put more funding towards creative industries, because like I understand, like there maybe is a limit in terms of what you guys get, but I'm not sure, like, is there anything you could discuss in terms of like what you're provided with, or is there anything you're like to discuss in terms of like funding and stuff?
Well, I mean, but budgets are always tight. I mean, but it's not impossible. It's not just the funding. Sometimes it's down to actual estate in terms of space to be able to do it.
Right.
And that's a big thing within sort of colleges and universities. In terms of areas to do it, we're always struggling to try and find a place and try and have what could be like a permanent space to do something like that. So it can be a bit of a luxury at, say, college level to say, okay, we're going to have a studio, but it has to be a kind of multi-purpose studio if we were going to do that, But so estate-wise, I think is more the prohibitive factor rather than just budget itself.
Like, I guess another one when it comes to you being able to teach, do you think, because obviously there's lots of software out there in terms of like licensing and so forth, is, for example, Edinburgh, I understand this applied to Abertay as well, and when I was in Aberdeen as well, is that licensing has its limitations. So there's only so much software you're also able to get access to. Like obviously there's like free student trials and stuff. Like for example, I know Autodesk, they have like it's completely free for 3ds Max and Maya for students, and then Blender, it's just free overall. But is there anything that maybe like software wise you wish you could improve on in terms of getting access to, or do you think like is there any tools out there that you wish you had access to besides the mocap?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously in the last sort of like 3 or 4 years, the growth of Substance Painter, and obviously Substance has been taken over by Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
So we will see Substance being added to our suite fairly shortly.
Awesome.
Which will be a big plus for most people. So there's that aspect to it. I mean, we're catered for fairly well software wise. Certainly, we're at what I've got within the studio. There's we've got ZBrush as well, which we need to update to the latest new update for.
Mm-hmm.
So software wise, it's not too bad. There's always we could always want and have more and more software, but it's getting the time to actually utilize it. And I think that's the time aspect that a lot of students maybe don't always take on board. They think things always can be done in a far shorter period of time in reality.
I think like that's when it comes to like the hard part in terms of determining like what the course is going to be about, because there's obviously so many different things to cover. And for example, if you're just doing like, for example, in Scotland, the system in terms of like the coursework, it's based off a thing called HNC and then a HND. So basically that's 2 separate years of work, and each year builds up to the next year. And then once you finish that year, you've covered a vast different area of different areas, and then you've also identified where you're kind of heading in terms of what you want to do as a career. And I think that's also the hard thing when it comes to the whole idea of software and what you're saying there about like what can I teach in the time that I have, but most importantly, what's going to be the most rewarding for the students. So I think that's when the whole debate of like what's being taught, like for example, me as an environment artist, it'd be great for me obviously to be like, right, you teach me this and this. However, since there's people who want to do animation, it's getting that balance, and I think it's always been a hard thing for teachers, and I think they get a lot of slack from it, because everyone's always like, I guess, complaining about the small things, whereas at the end of the day, the industry we're in is very, well, I'm not sure what you think, but I think it's very self-taught based. Like obviously the teachers can teach you so much in terms of like, for example, like I wouldn't have got into YouTube in terms of learnt the editing and stuff. Like I did start it before I went to Edinburgh, but it was because of your module doing like After Effects, doing Premiere, like learning how to film, and that I was able to develop this foundation for the podcast. So it's like these small things that you learn that are very important. So I guess we'll go into the next question. So how do you think teachers can improve overall for students? Is there anything that you've noticed? Like I remember we were discussing the other day, like sometimes teachers are giving grades out that aren't that shouldn't be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a proverbial can of worms there. I think, as we all know, that I think there are many ways in which teachers could improve, but you have to realise that we're kind of sort of hamstrung to a certain extent in terms of time. Colleges less so than say universities, until the structure in the universities really has to change. That would allow them to free up more time for perhaps more one-to-one or class contact. If you would say to me there are huge benefits obviously for the student if you get more contact time with your lecturer. Yeah,
I totally agree.
And I think part of the aggravation comes when a lot of students don't see the lecturers as often as they would like. And again, that can be for a variety of different reasons. Increasingly, well, certainly at universities, the lecturers are encouraged to take up research work, right? Because basically, the more research work the universities have in terms of bodies, lecturer bodies,
Okay.
the more funding they can pull down. So it kind of works. It works against the student, and it works more in favour of the university.
Right. Because it's
Right?
like it's always I guess it's always a hard topic to discuss because it's like you said, it's like obviously we as students, well obviously I'm not a student anymore, but when I was a student, it was great to get one-to-one feedback. Like I was very blessed in terms of like you were always putting way more extra hours in than a lot of people that I've been taught by. Like you were always helping. It's like you said at the start, you're literally like we could message you anytime, and that's taking money. That's taking time out of your day. Like you're like supporting us when you should be obviously just relaxing and stuff. And like obviously it shouldn't be the case that you shouldn't have to like always be putting all these hours in to help us. But it was really appreciated what you did. But I think one of the main things that I've realised, and it's one of the things I said earlier, is the fact that it'd be great if we had obviously more teachers in terms of, or like just like an extra person to support each class. But then again, I also understand that it's so hard to get people with the right information, with the right knowledge, with the right skill set to help you out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, like I reiterate this point because it is quite important. I do feel universities can do more and should do more. And like I say, they're a bit hamstrung by the system. And the system at university benefits, like I say, the university more than it benefits the student at present. Universities can pull down additional funding from the Funding Council for every member of staff who's working on a research project. So more staff doing research equals more money for the university. So it's a kind of sort of an accounting game. Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that time for research has to come from somewhere, and it's usually the class contact time with the students that suffer. I do know of examples where full-time members of staff have been doing research 4 days a week. So that only leaves the students 1 day a week, which is crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the time, students are expected to do self-directed study, which again, I feel is ridiculous.
Yep.
But stuff like this has been repeated right across the entire university sector, right? This leads to resentment and bitterness, as quite rightly students feel they've been shortchanged. I mean, I certainly would feel the same way, yeah?
Yeah.
Which, of course, they are being shortchanged, right? The other 2 or 3 things that affects, say, schools and universities and colleges to a certain extent is that they all have an ageing staff demographic, right? So we really need to train up the next generation of teachers and lecturers, and this takes time. And what I would do would bring back some. If you get a new teacher in or a new lecturer in, they're kind of new. They're kind of like they're cutting their teeth. They're going to make lots of mistakes. So what I would bring in, say, a retired staff member to do workshops with any new staff members to help them sort of work out the points and coping strategies they need to have for working with students for the first time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think, like for example, one area I want to dwell into, and it's crazy. You'll probably be shocked as well, but considering what I was like in college, like I've always been just like I was. Like I'll be open to say I was quite selfish in the sense that like when I was in college, like all I did was work and want to be as best as I could, and I developed this mindset. It was a bad mindset at the time, which was to literally how could I say it without sounding harsh, but it's like I didn't like I never cared about other people's work, if that makes sense. Like I was fully focused on myself, and it was only since in the last few years that teaching has actually been an interest of mine. So like I in the future I do plan on like one day I do want to open like a school. Like I have this sort of like ultimate dream, ultimate sort of plan, and teaching is actually one of those like plans that I want to like fulfill. And I guess like you're saying there about bringing in people and like trying to teach them like the fundamentals, like obviously that's key and that's great. Another thing that you did, which this was like the one thing I think you did that a lot of other places have not done, and that was, for example, if you didn't know something, you would always make sure that you got people with the right information to come in and like fully teach it. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really nobody knows everything, right? It doesn't matter what the subject matter.
mhm,
But I know lots of people who know lots of things.
mhm,
So I will quite happily come in and give a short something or a demonstration in order to get the point across. And if somebody is particularly then switched on by seeing something like that for the first time, and then they want to pursue it further, then I think that's what it's all about. It's all about engagement. You've got to engage the students. You've got to open up different horizons for the students. You've got to show them different elements and not just limit yourself to your own breadth of knowledge. You've got to, it'd be a bit like, walking into a library and only sort of going into one section of the library,
mhm.
You've got to sort of open up that library to everybody to study all different aspects of, whether it's, character design or animation or whatever the course is, and just bring in some additional expertise.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's exploring those different areas. Like I think obviously like your course in particular, and I think it also applies to the first few years of university, is obviously about finding your roots and
Mm-hmm.
finding like where you want to go. And obviously when it comes to the teachers in terms of where they can improve, obviously this is where the big debate comes into play in terms of it, because it comes down to you as a student to explore these areas, and that's what Ian's discussing, being able to be open to these different areas,
Yeah.
and obviously getting involved with the class, getting involved with, like for example, there's one common thing with artists, and you've definitely seen it over the years, Ian, which is people are like afraid to mingle or like get involved and sometimes talk to each other. And
Yeah. That's one of my pet peeves, my pet hates. Right.
yeah, so you were saying about students not talking and so forth is one of your pet peeves.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a thing about, even when I was a student, when the questions were asked, and then you would see all the Scottish students kind of putting their head down, and then you usually hear other students with different accents asking the questions, right? And I always found that terribly annoying, because a lot of the students do know what the answers are, but they feel that they're frightened to get something wrong, right? And I always try and work at it with my students to try and encourage them to sort of ask plenty of questions all the time, get over the fear of, sounding stupid or getting something wrong,
Yeah,
It's bizarre that all that does is just hold you back in terms of progress, not just in education, but in terms of what you're going to do after education. And I think that's one aspect which certainly universities should try and prepare students a lot better for. The universities do a lot of good work, a lot of good things, but maybe the exit from university is maybe could have some more work put in at that. Definitely preparing students with some, soft skills.
that was literally going to be the next question. So awesome, which was literally like, what could teachers do to make students more prepared?
Mhm.
And like obviously there's a lot of different things that we can bring up, but is there anything that's like the main one that comes to like just comes to mind for you? Like, is there any main things that you're saying there about soft skills? For example, presentations play such a huge part in developing just confidence overall. Is there anything else that you think could really improve their skill set?
Yeah, I mean, if we take the hard skills and soft skills together, I mean, hard skills you learn at college and university are great. The more you are become adept at them, the better you get at those. It sort of goes into your confidence as well and helps that as well. But I'm afraid we don't spend enough time on the nuts and bolts and fundamentals of even some of those hard skills. We could do spend a lot more time on those. However, there are certain things that are often missing that are termed soft skills. So, for example, if you're on an internship, which I always recommend that students should try and find one in your third year, preferably over the summer holiday or before, or you land your first break in the industry, then make yourself indispensable, volunteer, make the tea, work shadow, ask lots of questions, make more tea, offer to help them out in any way possible so they will remember you, right? And don't be too scared to say you don't understand something, right?
Yeah.
It's one of these things which can set you apart if you're asking questions. Yeah, don't in terms of asking stuff, it's better to ask 10 questions than ask one question, right? It shows that you have a passion. It shows you have an interest. It also speed up your creative process as well. So the more questions you ask, and you're not short of asking questions, Ross, I know that.
Oh, I ask them all the time, every day, non-stop. Until I get the answer, that's what I'll do.
That's it. But the other aspect of that, asking questions, is to listen very carefully to what the answers are. Don't try and be on your phone at the same time as you're trying to listen to somebody answer a question. It just doesn't work, right? It shows a little bit of disrespect as well, yeah?
Yeah.
But learning to talk openly and discuss things that, do not be afraid to fail, right? Failure is the best teacher. You learn from mistakes, so fail fast and fix it. That's it. Fail fast and fix it. Fail fast a lot and fix it.
Definitely.
If you have to learn to do multiple iterations of your artwork and designs, learn to speed up, learn to do all these, but don't get too precious about them. Yeah. These are just stepping stones along the way to doing something far stronger. So don't beat yourself up about it. Just get on with it. Just churn through the iterations, and eventually you'll get something which will be a lot stronger.
Yep. I think one of the main things that I learned from the whole idea of questions, like obviously it plays a big part, but the one thing, you said it to me once as well, a few lecturers at Albert said it to me, which was obviously like, asking questions is great, but the one thing you also have to do is learn obviously to trust yourself. For example, I used to have a habit of asking questions when I kind of already knew the answer and I kind of already knew where I was, but I had this self-doubt in my mind, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So it's like, obviously you want to ask all these questions, and it's one thing I preach every podcast, like it's the most important part, it's the only way you find out. And it doesn't matter what your skill set is, doesn't matter what level you're at. Like, for example, when it comes to the soft skills, one of the main things I realised that plays a part in people's confidence, and it's exactly what Iain just said there as well, but for example, when people are doing presentations and they're not proud of their artwork, their confidence drops. So when they're doing a presentation about that, their just overall display of confidence, just like you can just tell like they're nervous, you can just tell they're shy, maybe it's just a thing that they don't enjoy. However, your skill set will improve in time, whereas soft skills plays such a huge part just in life, not just in art, if that makes sense. Like it plays like in everything, just general confidence. So like Iain says, make sure to ask questions and explore different things. I'm just trying to think like other things when it comes to, I guess, preparing yourself for the industry. So for example, I had a module in Albert which was based around, for example, CVs, LinkedIn, social media, all of these different things, and that took place in my fourth year. The one downfall, I think, having that late in the year, like I loved Albert. Like Albert is a great university. I'll never knock it. I just like to always be open about how things can be better, just in general. For example, I know like certain schools around the world, like or just anything when it comes to the creative industries. I think they introduced the idea of, how can I say it, like treating yourself as a business person. Like I think they have to introduce that sort of mindset early on, like second year, and then bring it back again in fourth year just to like refresh yourself. Like for example, my main thing is obviously I use lots of social media. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I get involved in terms of going to events. So for example, I was in Vertex. I was down in London last week, and it was actually because of Pat. So Pat got in touch with me, asking me to go get involved. I was down in Vertex, and there was thousands of people at this conference, and you can tell there was a lot of people who were a bit shy to go up to, like, for example, Frame Store. Like there was quite a lot of people, like you could tell they were a wee bit nervous, but at the end of the day they got over their fear and they then stepped forward and they just asked questions. They showed the portfolio, they talked about what's required, one of the bigger shockers for me was actually realizing that the way they recruit people is actually based off who they already have in the studio. So basically how they recruit people is before they even make anything public, the way they do things is that they'll go to like their runners first. So like the runners are the first go-to people. So basically if you're new to the industry, a runner is basically, like Iain says, making tea, helping out at the very lowest entry level. However, that is then your stepping stone to then progress, for example, towards an environment artist. So I was down at Vertex, and another thing that was opened to us was, for example, the magazine companies. So 3D Artist Magazine, Imagine FX, and one of the best things I did when I was down there was simply opening up the podcast to them to try and publicly advertise it through their magazine. And if I didn't reach out to them, I wouldn't have been able to improve, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
It's these small things that that you have to just take a leap.
No, but I think what you're saying there about visits is absolutely correct. I mean, the more you can push yourself out there and make contacts with people, the better, you know. So whether it's at shows like Vertex or the Move Summit up in Scotland, I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of students at this year's one. It's getting bigger every year, and it's a great platform for students and other people looking to come into the industry just to come along and see some fantastic professional work. So I mean, you've got to promote yourself. You've got to get yourself out there, and don't be afraid to go up and talk to total strangers and ask them questions, because you're going to have to do that at some point. So start to do it when you're a student.
Yeah,
that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. So one of the other questions I want to ask you, Iain, this is actually one I've not actually asked you in the checklist of all the stuff I've sent you, but is there anything that you look for in terms of applications for students just for getting in? Like, is there any common things that stand out to you?
Oh yeah, God. It's the same with a lot of things. In terms of applications, well, when you write your own personal statements, there's certain things there that we will either see and our heart will lift when we read them, or our heart will sink when we read it, right? And please, please, please do not say you've got a passion for something, and then the first question I ask you proves the exact opposite. You do not have a passion for anything. You don't know. You can't name any people in the industry. You can't name any animators or whatever. You can't name any artists. So if you're passionate, make sure you do the homework. That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Perfect.
And in terms of work, then a variety of work and ideas, and being able to look at the fundamentals in terms of work. That maybe brings something that I was going to mention about art education.
Okay.
That fits in with what you're.
On you go. Yeah.
I mean, art education, I feel, has fallen way behind music education. Certainly from my perspective. Certainly during the last 25 years, even when I was a student, even when I was a pupil, music education was ahead of art education then, and all that seems to have happened over the last 25 years or so is art education has fallen further and further behind, and this is quite worrying. From my experience looking at portfolios, that on average, the basic drawing fundamentals are missing. Art education in the last 25 years has fallen way behind. If you look at music education as an example, music education has always been higher in terms of organisation and having a stronger political lobbying voice. And art education just doesn't have that to the same extent. In terms of the stuff that I've been seeing coming in portfolios over the last sort of 20 years or so, on average, it's going in a kind of downward trend, and this is quite worrying. I think we have to start to it's already been recognised that Education Scotland's just started to look at ways in which we can look to try and bridge this gap. And we really need to sort of do something very, very soon, because the gap is getting larger and larger. I mean, colleges are doing some very good work with local schools, and some great pilot projects have been underway over the last 2 years or so. Interns of creative process, introducing college students to go into local schools and working with young people in those local schools. And I think that's been a big help. But we need to look at the overall structure of art education, and it does vary from art department to art department and school to school, but we need to bring everything up. I mean, to strip back and get the fundamentals back there again, because the fundamentals are definitely being eroded, and they're missing in terms of teaching of drawing, because drawing, it's so very important, and I emphasise that to certainly my students, and you can learn so much from it. But I think we have to start engaging students in schools more, and I feel that to a certain extent the project work that they get, it can go on a wee bit too long, and they can disengage from that because of the length of the projects, because they've got continual assessment on some of these, and it can be too long, and the student disengages from the project, and you can see that in the work that they submit. You can see the bits that they've been engaged with, and the bits that they've just totally disengaged with, and it's quite disappointing, actually, sometimes, looking at the work.
Yeah. It's all these like, I completely understand where you're coming from. Like, obviously, like, for example, when I was in secondary school, I did both art, and then I also did graphcom. So, like, both of them was my two main things when it came to my creative outlet through secondary school. And I was quite fortunate in the sense that, believe it or not, we even had 3ds Max at our school. Which that was one thing I did not expect to have for secondary school anyway, and it was because of a lecturer that my teacher at the time, who got me into 3D, but I wouldn't have been able to have an interest without the art being like decent, if that makes sense. So if I wasn't getting taught, for example, fun topics, a range of topics like you're saying there, like, for example, one of the main things that my teacher did, she did dragon concept art. And like, that was really awesome. So yeah, when I was in school, basically what I had, obviously I had like all these different software and stuff access to me, and it was really helpful overall. And for example, all these other I guess schools that maybe are less privileged don't have access to these things. And when I was in art and crafts, so art and design, one of the main things that made it very rewarding was the fact that my teacher at the time was creating very up-to-date sort of interest, in terms of, like, she was drawing lots of dragons, lots of things that my mind, my passion as a creative was attracted to. And it's like you're saying about both the school investing in the right teachers, making sure that there's still money getting put towards these things, and making sure that, for example, art's not getting dismissed and getting ignored. And I guess, obviously, like you're saying, like, a lot of people are trying to improve it, but it's obviously like the whole debate around money and what the younger generation are more attracted to. But obviously it plays a huge part, like advertising, getting more people involved in like daily activities and stuff, and taking part in a lot of different things.
Yeah, I think it's not just a case of money per se. I think it's also, this is a kind of double-edged sword. I've got to watch what I'm saying here, because there are a lot of teachers at secondary schools would love to have more training, would love to have CPD and training on stuff, and they're just not getting the opportunity to do that, right? Conversely, there are teachers that perhaps aren't so keen on embracing some new technology. That's just human nature. You get that in all different walks of life. It's not just teachers. You've got it in all different walks of life. But I think some of that is just down to a little bit of fear. It's if people are just, if technology is thrown at people, they either tend to do two things: either trying to embrace it, learn it, or they go into sort of silo mentality of pretending it's not there and avoiding it. And that, again, that's just human nature. But it's the people that benefit from people who embrace it are the likes of the students at the end of the day. You know, if you can have one student in a class which suddenly sees the benefit of that, and if that's a software program that can enable them to do things. I mean, for example, I know for a fact that there's that many schools have the Adobe Suite, right?
Yep.
Not so many schools have teachers who know the Adobe Suite and can teach the Adobe Suite, right? So more training for teachers would make the teachers feel better about it and would give them more confidence to work with the likes of the software and open up a few additional possibilities. But again, it's down to time. It's making training available. You know, and I think the schools really need to do a lot more than they currently are doing for that. Yeah,
yep, I totally agree. So carrying on with the podcast in terms of the next question. So this is literally one question I've asked like literally everybody. So we've covered a lot of different topics, but what would you say is the benefits of going to college and university? Like, why would you want somebody to go to college? Why should they go to university?
Right, okay. The benefits of going to college or university can be many and numerous. College or university give you the opportunity to make your own voice heard in terms of creative direction, for example. It offers up an unbelievable opportunity to experiment in all areas. It can help push you to the very limits of what you think is possible within yourself, and then some more, right? It allows you a sense of freedom that you'll seldom find in the working environment. But above all, it allows you to make good friends and contacts. I'm still in touch with many of the people from my college days, and in the early days of forging a career, it's an invaluable resource. You will hear of job opportunities first through your friends and contacts. You will take on freelance work from them and give freelance work to them, and you'll establish professional friendships with many of your colleagues and their colleagues by doing this. So the benefit of going to college or university in terms of networking is absolutely huge. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I would also say to that, why would I think one of your other questions was talking about recommending creatives going to college or university, yeah? Well, first of all, it kind of depends on the artist, it depends on the university, and it depends on the choice of course. So do your homework. I mean, in this internet age, I'm still surprised at just how little effort is put in to investigate courses at college or university by prospective students. This is one of the reasons I started taking students on trips to universities. Going up to Dundee and Aberdeen and doing them both in a day. Visits to Glasgow Caledonian, visits to Napier, visits to Edinburgh College of Art. Trying to break down barriers so they can get a feel for the place in terms of what the working space is, what the environment is like, looking at the layout, opportunities to talk to other students who study there. I mean, you're about to embark on a journey of creativity and enter a creative arena where you can hone your skills. So, I mean, you have to really sort of do your homework as much as possible and visit all these places. Go more than once, You can go somewhere on a rainy, wet day and get a bad impression, So sometimes it's maybe worth going more than once, but going at different times of the year, yeah? Because if you're going to invest a lot of time in your future in this, institution for, 3 or 4 years or whatever, or or however length the period of time is, then really do the homework.
Because it's always been a very, I guess, talked up discussion from a variety of different people in terms of obviously the benefits of going to college and university over online courses and stuff, and then obviously in Scotland we're a bit more fortunate than other places in terms of the fees, because one of the big articles that's been written when it comes to art just overall globally is the price, and one of the main artists who did that was Noah Bradley. So when Noah Bradley was discussing about like what his thoughts are, his was very different, but his opinion was very based off what it was like in America, where in terms of Scotland's, if you're listening to the podcast and you're wanting to get into creative industries, I highly recommend exploring Scotland, even if you're an international student, because Scotland has a foundation that obviously like there's like certain fees that you still have to pay, but they're nowhere near any of the other places in the world. They're a lot less strict, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if you want to talk about that as well.
I think, well, fees are one of these issues that, and certainly the Scottish Government have always believed that education should be free, right? And we're not alone in that respect. There are many other countries in the world who have free education. I think once you start turning education into an elitist area where only the very, very rich can afford it, then that's a dangerous path to go down, because not only do you cut out a lot of very talented people that could be going on to university, but they just can't afford it. You know, I mean, it seems to be a very, very short-sighted existence, but you're also lumbering whole generations with huge payments, huge fees, which rightly or wrongly, and it can take them, you know, it's like having a mortgage coming out of university. I know students that are coming out of university down in England, they've got, 50 grand worth of debt, you know.
Wow.
It's absolutely crazy. And that's after 3 years. That's not after 4, that's after 3 years, you know. It's just absolutely, I mean, who wants to be starting off their working life with that sort of hanging over them?
Yeah.
And yes, it doesn't kick in terms of payments till they earn a certain amount, and maybe after 20 years, then that might end or whatever. But it's a worry. People will go to sleep at night worrying about that, and that's not good for your mental health. That's for sure. You know,
Definitely.
And that's another aspect I was going to maybe touch on in terms of, education. And one of the things that's seen a huge increase in numbers of students with mental health problems has been it's been on the increase, and is quite worrying. And it's one of these aspects. I know some of your podcasts have touched on it before. But it is a huge issue, and we do our best to recognise that issue, and we do as much as we can, certainly within Edinburgh College, to help the students out. But sometimes the students are very good at disguising their mental health problems.
Definitely.
And then they maybe only reveal them, and by then it's too late. And then we can't do much for them. They maybe failed the course, because of it. Yeah. And like I said, both colleges and universities have been getting better and better, and there's some additional money coming in again from the Scottish Government to help with that. So hopefully things are going to get a wee bit better there. But it is another area that, to a certain extent, hamstrings the delivery, because if you're aware that there through mental health there's been infrequent attendance, it means sometimes that you can't cover the amount of ground that you would normally cover. So it does put the brakes on a little bit more so than, say, even 10 years ago. I was covering a lot more over the same space of time, but I've had to slow down a good bit.
To relax more, get the foundation better.
Yeah, I think so. Just in terms of just giving people opportunities to try and establish things right and giving them a bit more time to do it. Which is, it's not a bad thing. It's just, I think, there's always somebody that's going to suffer, and I think sometimes some students feel that they may be suffering because of that. They could be, but then it's not to stop students themselves from sticking their head down and learning and going off and doing more stuff.
I think like one things I have a bit of a debate when it comes to student education and the whole idea of mental health is the fact that there's always this sort of build up of pressure, in the sense that, like, obviously pressure's healthy. Like, it's like you need to be pushed to understand where you can go, and to just give you the right mindset overall. However, the one thing I've always had a bit of a grudge against in terms of just a system is the fact that, like, there's so much different things. Like, for example, like, there's the grades, there's the whole idea of written material and having so much written material being required, whereas it's taking away the main point, which is the art. And this has always been, like, for example, like with me, when I was doing any written things, I've always wanted to make sure it's as perfect as possible, and I would always make sure I did as much of it as possible. Like, I would make sure that when my lecturer was reading, like, I felt sorry for you when you had to read my stuff, because I always gave you like 1,000 pages, but it was like, I think it's trying to get that balance of making sure that the art's always, like, I always think it should be like, I know this may sound crazy to you, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on it, but I've always felt it should be like 80% art, 20% writing, or maybe even more art. I don't know, but
yeah, no, I mean, the thing is it's one of the things that when I and my compatriots were at art school, that's literally what it was. It was 80% practical work and 20% doing your thesis.
Yep.
And what's happened progressively over the years is that 20% has increased and increased and increased. And for courses that are practical courses, there is that it doesn't make sense to be increasing the theory almost to the point that it's 50-50. It's just a crazy thing to do, and industry doesn't thank you for it. They're not particularly interested in the fact that you've got a huge, great big thesis, but the quality of your work is about shit, right? Because that's what's going to get you your job. They're not looking at your thesis. They're looking at the quality of your work in your portfolio or in your showreel, and that's what gets you the work. That's what gets you the job. That, along with some good, soft skills and being able to explain the work and be able to have eye contact and be able to ask lots of questions, that's what's going to put you in a position of work at the end of the day, right? So you need so everybody who you need to concentrate on making your work and your portfolio the best you possibly can do, right? And if you do that and you show initiative and you show a range of abilities, then you will eventually get your opportunity and you'll get some work from it.
You'll get there.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, again, it's a statistic which is one, again, which a lot of universities probably don't make people aware of, is that usually that, when a student graduates, then usually within the first 18 months to 2 years, then there's a high percentage of students start to give up, right? Finding work, yeah. And the ones that continue and keep going, they're the ones that usually find the position, right? But there's a lot of people that they tried for a year, they give up, they tried for 18 months, they give up, they try for 2 years, they give up, and then that's it, they're off doing something else completely, right? Which is a bit soul destroying and a waste of, it's a waste of sort of time to a certain extent. But you can understand where they're coming from, But for the people who, start having self-confidence issues, it's one of these things you just got to keep at it until you crack it and you work
get it
better and better. Yeah, that's it.
Like, I think that's, like, for example, with me, like, you know what I'm like in terms of as a person, but the main thing that I've always like I've always said in every podcast, like I've always had my vision, and like I know exactly what I'm doing to get me where I want to get. A lot of people may disagree with how I'm doing it. However, because I've got my mindset, I've got my goal, I know I'll get there. Like, and I'm not gonna let anything affect it. But if you don't know what you're wanting to get, then you just have to keep exploring it, keep trying it. Because if you've spent so much time at university, at college, and you have a passion for this, why would you stop? It's the main topics I was bringing up in my last podcast. It's the right mentality, and like understanding time management, understanding all the things that you need to do, and like you said, like Ian just said, it takes time to get there as well. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. It will take hard work, persistence, consistency, all these different aspects. It may be annoying to hear it, but it's just the truth, and if you just have to keep working at it.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, the more people you can talk to, the more people you can get advice from in terms of your work can change hugely in the space of, a year, 18 months from leaving university to doing additional work thereafter. But, you've got to listen to what people are saying about your work. It might not, sometimes it can hurt, but you've got to learn to grow a thick skin very quickly. Because if you want to stay in this industry, then you got to A, learn to listen to people, and B, take good criticism and ask questions as to what they need to do to improve, and then take it on board and go off and do it. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm not sure if there's any other main topics maybe you want to maybe dwell into. Is there anything, or is there any topics you want to talk about? Or is everything all good? Because there's so many different areas we can twist.
We had, I mean, there's a lot in there, and we had quite a few interruptions with the line cutting out. So I'm not sure which bits, in terms of your editing prowess. You'll be able to sort of put all those that good editing prowess.
Yes, I'll see what I can do. No, but thank you so much for coming on, Ian. It really means a lot. If you're new to the podcast, make sure to, like I said, to check out all the different platforms. Don't forget to leave a like. Make sure to subscribe. And thank you so much for listening. And I will see you guys in the next video. So thanks once again, Ian, and bye for now.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Bye just now.
I say thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Ross Baxter's YouTube channel for excellent tutorials and podcasts.